The Orange Catholic Bible, the fundamental scripture of the Imperium. The following essay has been attributed to Paul Muad'Dib, and it is one of the few complete works by this historical figure to have been found in the Rakis Hoard. Paul was known for his profound interest in the Orange Catholic Bible, and its tenets played an important role in his legendary life. By editor. Mankind's movement through deep space placed a unique stamp on religion during the 110 centuries that preceded the Butlerian Jihad. Early space travel, widespread though it was, proceeded in a fashion largely unregulated, slow, and uncertain. Before the guild monopoly, it was accomplished by a hodgepodge of methods with successive waves of general expansion and cross-migrations of large populations. Space travel was not lightly undertaken. A once-in-a-lifetime experience was quite enough for most people who were driven at first only by necessity to commit themselves to the dark void that was space. From the beginning of the travels, space gave a different flavor and sense to ideas of creation. Genesis was a dark mystery. The difference is seen even in the highest religious achievements of that period. All through religion, the feeling of the sacred was touched by anarchy from the outer dark. As one of our more poetic, though anonymous historians expressed it, it was though Jupiter in all his descendant forms retreated into the material darkness to be superseded by a female eminence filled with ambiguity and with the face of many terrors. The ancient formulae intertwined, tangled together as they became fitted to the needs of new conquests and new heraldic symbols. It was a time of struggle between beast demons on the one side and the old prayers and invocations on the other with no clear decision, but there were innumerable adaptations, some more grotesque than others. The evolutionary history of religions in space is vast. During the early period of space travel, it was said that Genesis 1:28 was reinterpreted, permitting God to say, "Increase and multiply and fill the universe, and subdue it, and rule over all manner of strange beasts and living creatures in the infinite airs, on the infinite earths, and beneath them." Thus the idea of God expanded with the idea of history. Eschatological questions, forced to postpone themselves to yet more distant futures in quote-unquote real time, were, though never dismissed from speculations of fear and hope, forced to yield to more immediate and local issues. Thus the idea of God diminished, opening a way for those who could, or who pretended they could, offer promises for the immediate future based on an arcane development of oracular power. It was a time of sorceresses whose powers were real. Women with the power to control and attune their bodies and minds to the rhythms of history seized their opportunity to dominate world populations. It was a time of goddesses, such as Kubebe of Komos, Haut of Humidis, Serite the all-knowing of the Wallach group, whose worship spread to many planets, Viera of Gamant, and many others. It was a time when Kali unveiled many of her most dread faces to reign supreme over the destinies of men. The measure of the witch priestesses who served at her altars is seen in the fact that they never boasted how they grasped the firebrand in her loins. Not content with their rule over single planets, they saw advantages in joining together, their own form of ecumenical movement, so that they might shape the universe. Thus flourished the power of the Bene Gesserit and the establishment of their breeding program. Then came the Butlerian Jihad, causing generations of chaos. The god of machine logic was overthrown among the masses, and a new concept was raised. Man may not be replaced. This BG-sponsored campaign removed from men a rival power of futurological control. These generations of violence were a thalamic pause for all mankind. Men of insight looked at their gods and their rituals and saw that both were filled with that most terrible of all equations, fear over ambition. It was time for a new and greater ecumenical movement to begin. Hesitantly, the leaders of religions whose followers had spilled the blood of billions in planetary purges and interplanetary wars began meeting to exchange views. It was a move encouraged by the Spacing Guild, which was beginning to build its monopoly over all interstellar travel, through its superior navigators, and by the Bene Gesserit, who foresaw increased opportunities for furthering their own plans, although their hopes were not at all to be realized in the event. Out of those first ecumenical meetings came two major developments. One, the realization that all religions had at least one common commandment: thou shalt not disfigure the soul; and 2. The commission of ecumenical translators. Thou shalt not disfigure the soul, but who is to decide where modification ends and disfigurement begins? The Fremen believe that the land of your birth makes you what you are. Are there strange animals on your planet? They ask. The Fremen themselves consider that they are the undisfigured ones, yet their blue-on-blue eyes, the sign of spice addiction, their cruel and secretive customs, their siege orgies, and their worship of the dragoness Shai-Hulud are sufficient indications to most people that they are rather, to use the words of their own text, the owners of diseased hearts. Nevertheless, there are many admirable individuals amongst the Fremen. Abominations happen within the heart or soul. It is not imposed from without. Let us be humble enough to acknowledge that however fair we may consider our physical appearance, soul disfigurement might be lying in wait for us, might even have happened to us without our knowledge or consent. The recorded experience of Muad'Dib, of Aliyah, and partial as it is of Leto II, has given new impetus to psychosomatic theological study, and has also shifted the emphasis of concern from eschatological determination, whether seen in terms of paradise, or heaven and hell, or nirvana, to psychomachy, or psycho-Machiavellianism, as my witty colleague Miars calls it, and its implications for this worldly power politics. Ancestor worship and propitiation are also reviving. These problems were not, of course, stirring the minds of the CET, for whom God was safely transcendent, not an actual living vermicular presence. I express myself so freely because I know that these words will be buried deep for generations. Then as now, however, all men were deeply and humanistically interested in the idea that they had some great destiny within the universe, and religious sought divine guidance and feared Shaitanic interference. Contents of the Orange Catholic Bible. The OC Bible is more than a revised amalgamation of the ancient Holy Scriptures. It considerably extended the traditional canon, although it also abridged and reordered it. It came packaged with the liturgical manual and the commentaries. The OC Bible reflected the blendings of scriptural tradition that had already occurred for reasons of planetary convenience, and radically extended them. The dramatic new melding inevitably produced an impression of stark dislocation on many readers. In order to offset this, a comprehensive index and marginal collations were provided. Further, from the outset it was envisaged that each planet should have its own supplement, although it was of course impossible to produce all the requisite editions at once, and this caused misunderstandings. The very vastness of the new compendium carried its ecumenical message: your faith has hitherto been too small. The CET was particularly fond of the idea of harmonization, which they saw as an ecumenical activity. They were also adept at covering their tracks, as it was no part of their purpose to suggest that previous texts and arrangements had special authority. As a consequence, they guaranteed labor for the next generation of scholars who were engaged in assembling that bibliographic marvel, the Hazar Book, which preserves the great secrets of the most ancient faiths and traces the received texts to their origins. With the help of the Hazar Book, we can see something of the process of harmonization which rendered the stiff old texts of the Bible, the Quran, and so on, plastic enough to be mixed and twisted. Some of the texts, which interestingly enough remain among the most popular, proved highly resistant to change. The Book of Job passed through the furnace almost unscathed, for some reason, as did Preacher. Revelation, not to be confused with Revelations, was quite unchanged, whether because of CET exhaustion once the last book of the Old Bible canon had been reached, or because of the dire threat in the last chapter, remains uncertain. In the former Old Testament and New Testament, there was in general a great simplification, evident in the reduction of the number of books that remain from them, as well as the compression of their contents, when this can be observed in the unmelded text. The books that remain are Genesis, Exodus, Laws, Promises, Kings, Refugees, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Preacher, Prophets, Gospel, Apostles, Epistles, Revelation. The most controversial omission from the canon is Canticles, also known as the Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, which has nevertheless survived and is to be traced in various other OC Bible texts, including Blake School Visions and the Sari. We have a hint in the Bertoli memoirs to explain the omission. Quote, Bomoko hated the text which made Shiba say, "I am black but comely." His own wife was brown and remarkably ugly, and suspected more or less jokingly of a secret attachment to Obeah rituals after she was once seen chasing a chicken into the jungle. Unquote. It is more likely that many of the representatives were instructed by their congregations to nail a text which had often been embarrassing to the churches, and that which, in spite of their proclamation, which has, of course, been much misunderstood, about producing an instrument of love to be played in all ways, the delegates were careful not to produce a book that in any way expressed the idea of love as it is secularly regarded. It may be necessary in this connection also to remind those who know such religions as the Kathloa Church of Urzuli and the Vatsayayana evangelicals only by their names that there is a great difference in religious matters between professions and practices. The most difficult work of harmonization may be seen in the production of gospel, the first diatessaron to establish itself beyond competition from the four evangelists, who now became relegated to mere names and symbols. The historical scholarship behind this attempt to establish the life of Jesus on a firm, incontrovertible basis was immense, but it had an effect on its context that may or may not have been well calculated by the CET. It reduced the life of Jesus to one among several lives of saints and prophets and servants of God. Clearly, the Mahometic faction in the CET had much to do with creating this impression, which was certainly in line with the CET claim to dispossess all disputant religions of the idea that they might have a uniquely valuable revelation. When they saw the effect of this claim in cold print, however, it is noteworthy that the Sunni Islamic faiths were as shocked as the others by what their representatives had perpetrated in their names. All the historical books of Judeo-Christian scripture were harmonized as far as possible, if not farther, with the Quran. The legal books were augmented by the Torah, Quran, Confucian traditions, while the wisdom literature of Proverbs was assimilated to Taoist and Socratic dicta, at least. The pure Quran was represented in the OC Bible by the books of Sari and Kalima, and the important Siret text should also be mentioned here, although it is suspected that this was in part augmented by the CET themselves, who numbered some well-published poets among them. The Masnavi and Traditions are other books that seem largely Islamic in composition. Among the Hindu and Buddhist traditions may be placed the following books: Upanishads, Vedas, Puranas, Gita, Sutra, Bodhisattva, Avatara, while the books of Koan Answers, Ohashi, Huinying, and Tao may be ascribed rather to the Zensunni traditions. From other ancient sources come the books of Analects and Pahlavi, while the books of Aran, Blake's Skull Visions, and Revelations are believed to be more recent in origin, and the Book of Hymns is both ancient and modern. A controversial but most helpful feature of the OC Bible is its addition to the canonical scriptures of the books of Holy Lives and Testimonies, without which we very likely shall not have the histories of many saints, martyrs, sectarian founders, and missionaries, and the records of miracles as remarkable as any of those recorded in ancient scriptures. The ordeals suffered by the faithful and their mixed experiences of sin and redemption are a great source of consolation, as well as of inspiration in our own troubled times. One of the hardest decisions for the CET was not merely to establish the contents of their Bible, but to agree upon a title, one that would be brief yet broadly descriptive, one that would reflect the ecumenical spirit without appearing narrowly exclusive. In early fragments of his memoirs, Bertoli refers to it as the Koranjayana Zen Christian Scriptures, or as the Zen Christian Navakoran. But after the fourth year it seems to be settled, in his mind at least, that Orange Catholic Bible was to be the name. We must suppose that a day or a week was given over to settling what may have become a matter of embarrassing dispute. The terms Orange and Catholic do, however, seem to have established themselves as reflecting the more innovative and rational, as opposed to the more conservative and traditional schools of thought, sometimes being used quite lightly, if we may judge by odd remarks of Bertoli, such as, "What a delightfully pompous Catholic statement," or "Catholic to a C," or "Utterly orange is the only word to describe that nonsense," or "For an orange, that little acolyte of Bruin's is quite a peach," and All of those oranges are bananas. Remarks not at all clear to us now, but some were clearly meant as witticisms. The origin of the term orange, as applied to a religious sectarian, is now obscure, but its religious significance is so overwhelming nowadays that few remember it as the ancient name of a fruit now called portulgos. The O.C. Bible Liturgical Manual was a natural outgrowth of the practice faithfully observed by the CET of attending morning and evening services every day according to the tradition of a different faith. On Wednesdays, which were defined as honorary Sabbaths for the duration of the exercise, delegates were allowed to worship as they chose in the mornings, but in the evenings all attended in ecumenical service, for which an ever-changing committee was responsible. The experience of being subjected to some of the more elaborate and irksome liturgies and rituals, "they did everything except sacrifice virgins," was Bertolli's disgusting comment on a rite that is fortunately nameless, together with the difficulty of administrating some of them, brought home to many of the delegates the advantages of harmonizing the best practices. The liturgical manual, then, while faithfully recording the various peculiar modes of worship practiced by the faiths represented in the CET, also supplies several model ecumenical liturgies and endorses those, whether peculiar or ecumenical, considered most suitable for constituting a complete program of devotions for the whole year. The O.C. Bible commentaries constitute in many respects a more remarkable work even than the Bible, not only because of its brevity, less than half the size of the O.C. Bible, but also because of its candor and blend of self-pity and self-righteousness. Considered as a work of explication, the commentaries is less than satisfactory. It is rather the product of philosophical meditation on the profound importance of the CET endeavor in the context of universal religion and the galactic IMPERIUM. The beginning is an obvious appeal to the agnostic rulers. Quote, "Men, finding no answers to the Sunnah, the 10,000 religious questions from the Sharia, now apply their own reasoning. All men seek to be enlightened. Religion is but the most ancient and honorable way in which men have striven to make sense out of God's universe. Scientists seek the lawfulness of events. It is the task of religion to fit man into this lawfulness." In their conclusion, however, the commentaries set a harsh tone that very likely foretold their fate. Quote, "Much that was called religion has carried an unconscious attitude of hostility toward life. True religion must teach that life is filled with joys pleasing to the eye of God, that knowledge without action is empty. All men must see that the teaching of religion by rules and rote is largely a hoax. The proper teaching is recognizing with ease. You can know it without fail, because it awakens within you the sensation which tells you this is something you have always known." Reception of the Orange Catholic Bible. There was an odd sense of calm as the presses and Shigawire imprinters rolled and the O.C. Bible spread out through the worlds. Some interpreted this as a sign from God, an omen of unity. But even the CET delegates betrayed the fiction of that calm as they returned to their respective congregations. 18 of them were lynched within 2 months. 53 recanted within the year. The critical reception of the O.C. Bible was on the whole more favorable. The CET representatives were likened in the space-times to archaeologists of ideas, inspired by God in the grandeur of rediscovery. The editor of the ecumenical column of the Church Standard, whose last contribution this was, said that the CET had brought to light, quote, "the vitality of great ideals overlaid by the deposits of centuries, and that they had sharpened the moral imperatives that come out of a religious conscience." So wrote the innocent Monseigneur de Maxutoc, while those about him sharpened their axes. More in tune with the reactionary mood in the congregations was the writer in The Sons, who denounced the O.C. Bible as a work produced by the hubris of reason. Its pages, he said, were filled with a seductive interest in logic. The review was a star item on the second page opposite a seductive holograph of the latest Miss Universe. Yet more influential was the holovisual interview with the famous Blue Bishop, Holloway, whose label for CET's 7-year effort, Galactophasic Determinism, beamed throughout the galaxy, was snapped up by eager billions who interpreted the initials GD as God Damned. The GDOCs, God Damned Old Cranks, were crucified by the characterists in effigy and by the congregations in fact. The immediate demands for an authorized revised version were, of course, doomed to failure, since no ecumenical body of sufficient authority could again be assembled. This did not prevent the appearance of various revised versions that catered to popular bigotry. However, simply because it was so controversial, the Orange Catholic Bible, in one way or other, of the special planetary or guild editions that were soon distributed, was the version that everybody bought and everybody read. It awakened a new interest in Scripture and in religious issues unprecedented since the first translations of the Bible into the vernacular. The reactionary revisions leaned on accepted symbolisms: cross, crescent, feather rattle, the 12 saints, the thin Buddha, the horned goddess, and the like, and it soon became apparent that the ancient superstitions and beliefs had not been absorbed by the new ecumenism. The compilers of the Azar book traced many of these beliefs back, sometimes to surprisingly uncouth pagan faiths long discredited officially. The CET chairman Tori Bomoko appeared to admit finally that CET had erred in trying to manipulate the props of popular religion. "We shouldn't have tried to create new symbols," he said. "We should have realized we weren't supposed to introduce uncertainties into accepted belief, that we weren't supposed to stir up curiosity about God. We are daily confronted by the terrifying instability of all things human, yet we permit our religions to grow more rigid and controlled, more conforming and oppressive. What is this shadow across the highway of divine command? It is a warning that institutions endure, that symbols endure when their meaning is lost, that mere is no summa of all attainable knowledge." The bitter double edge in this admission did not escape Bomoko's critics, and he was forced soon afterward to flee to exile. His life depended upon the guild's pledge of secrecy. He reportedly died on Tupile, honored and beloved. His last words: "Religion must remain an outlet for people who say to themselves, 'I am not the kind of person I want to be.' It must never sink into an assemblage of the self-satisfied." It is pleasant to think that Bomoko understood the prophecy in his words: institutions endure. He himself passed into history as a symbol of religion's integrity and foresight, part of the myth of the 14 sages, who never recanted and who keep reappearing even in the plays of Hark al-Harba. 90 generations later, the OC Bible and the commentaries permeated the religious universe. By M.T. Faiths responsible for the Orange Catholic Bible. This list is taken from the flyleaf of the first edition. Note: only 101 religions are listed, because 20 of the original CET were recalled before the work was completed. The Ahmadiyya Christian Council. The Assemblies of Allah. Astronomical Christian Observers. Baptismal Cosmotheists of Shingon. Belt Hypostatical Program. Benkalism and Gangshiri. The Bhakti Votaries. Black Vedantist Conclave. The Buddhist Pali Movement. The Buddha-Islamic Christian Church of Saikun. The Buddha-Islamic Jain Faith of Lankaveck. The Calvinistic Genetical Determinant Elect Body, Incorporated. The Cape Separatist Union. The Cathloa Church of Erzulie. The Catholic Protestant Tribe of Derry. The Catholic Zenvestran Council. The Christian Zionist Pilgrims. The Church of Eurasia. Church of the Holy Atta. The Church of Selene. Confucian Status of the Imperium. The Congregation of Molitor. The Cosmic Charismatic Movement. The Cybernetic Reformed Churches. The Diasporic Council of Rabbis. The Ecumenical Sectarian Council. The Episcopalian Methodist Church. The Evangelical Missionary Campaign on Position 1. The Faiths of Beulah. The Galatian Orthodox Church. The Galactic Spiritual Assemblies of Baha'is. The Great Mother Church. The Grumanian Orthodox Establishment. The Hasidic Lutheran Dynasty. Hasidi Islamic Union. the Hellenic Orthodox Ecclesia, the Hinayana Buddhist Way, Ikebana Shaktist Order of Anthos, the Jain Buddhist Assembly, the Jainite Foundation, Jerusalem Urbanite Citizens of Network, the Jesuitical Evolutionist Church of Chardon, the Kubebe Cultists of Comos, the Latin Revivalist Ministers, Leeson Universalism, Lutheran Amida Worshippers, Lutheran Catholic United Church, the Mahayana Buddhist Union, the Mahayana Christian Temple of Infail, the Mahayana Lakavatara Friends of Truth, the Modified Hanuman Church of Sifilj, the Muad Quran Faithful on Caladan, Muslim Fightists of the Naraj Worlds, the Navachristian Church of Chusuk, the Nebuloid Dervish Spire, the Neo-Maimonidist Rabberate, New Philadelphia Friends Yearly Meeting, the Ominian Variationists Reformed, the Orange Protestant Army of True Believers, the Ortho-Catholic Circle of Sigma Oricams, the Orthodox Gregorian Chantry, Pan-Islamic Fellowship, Pan-African Reformed Churches in Union, the Ramakrishna Gospel Mission to Bayrek, the Race-Based Worshippers, the Roman Catholic Episcopal Church, the Sacerdotal Hermeticists of Beta Tegius, the Servants of Light, Olaf, Socratic Christian Dialogists, Fourth Anbus, the Solarian Centrist Tradition, Space Baptist Mission, Portrin, the Stellar Deist Watchmen of Ix, the Sug-Islamic Congregationalists of Tupali, the Sunni Orange Cooperative Jafur, the Sunsufi chapter of Kadrish, the Talmudic Zabur followers Salusa Secundus, the Tantric Rhythmists of Rachizi, Taoist Pilgrims in Space, the Taura Collegiate Salusa Secundus, the Tendai Fundamentalist Church, Tenri Kaio Science in the Galaxy, 10th-day Adventist Church on Rapide, the Tehran Orthodox Church of Nova Bruns Planet, the Tamasian Faith, the Unitarian Galactic Church, the United Church of Rosak, the United Moravian Assembly, the Universal Hindu Faith Headquarters Hagal, the Universal Pantheist Religion, the Vatsyayana Evangelical Mission, Position 3, the Visionaries of Los Vivakrishnan, the Disciples of the Voodoo Reformed Cult, the White Kirk of Maclean, the Zabulonian Mennonites, the Zen Baptist Union, the Zen Hekiganshu Faith of In Delta Pavonis, the Zen Shintoist Imperial Church, Zenzuni Catholic Amalgamation, the Zenzuni Wanderers, Zoroastrian Dualists of Tupile. Further references: Orange Catholic Bible, in Life and Teaching of Paul Muad'Dib. Anonymous, The Dune Gospels. Pierre Brisviar, a Verarium edition of the Orange Catholic Bible Commentaries. Summa of Ancient Beliefs and Practices. Bolchev, Collegium Tarno.